with policy briefs that extract the key policy dimensions of it. And then if a policymaker reads the policy brief and wants to get into in more detail, then they would hopefully go to the working paper. So when aiming at doing science for society, it's not only about having relevant content, but about how you package those key findings. So in my very last words, and circling back to the AfCFTA and just trying to weave together some of the disparate strands of this lecture this afternoon. I think in my views, some of the key binding constraints on regional integration in Africa and transformative industrialization for Africa are not necessarily, in the first instance, a lack of research and knowledge. We need to recognize these are complex issues with various political economy dimensions and needing political will to manage. So it would be naive to think that just churning out a body of high quality research would magically unlock regional integration or industrialization. But having said that, in the spirit of science for society, we all need to contribute where we can. And in the case of the NRF, university-based researchers, ORTARChI chairs, and so on, that will primarily take the form of contributing to a body of rigorous, quality, relevant research, and going the extra mile to ensure that that research reaches decision makers. Especially important that this research goes beyond South Africa, and hence the ORTARChI initiative is ideally placed to play a leading role in this regard. It's also important to have a collaborative research network that brings together diverse expertise across countries. We could say that for many topics, but even more so for the topic of the AfCFTA. It's self-evident that for research to have an impact on this, it can't just be undertaken in any one country. So bringing together research and researchers across the continent is fundamental to the relevance and impact of the research for the AfCFTA. In addition, there's also multidimensional complex challenges associated with this agenda. It's not just an economics issue. It brings in law, politics, engineering, industrial relations, and so on, international relations. So it follows that the research which is needed must be multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary as well. So this points to the need for, I would say, a community of practice with small letters, not necessarily a community of practice in the formal sense of an NRF call and a grant and so on, although those are, of course, always helpful. But a community of practice in the real sense of a network that brings together collaborative research in the area. So a community of practice in practice. I think this also has relevance for the ORTARChI initiative as well as more broadly. Let me leave it there. Thank you.
Just remain there, Prof. Before I go to Prof. Boso, just want to ask you a question. You know, you've talked about different mechanisms in terms of communicating your research output. What concerns me, as I said, I'm a newbie in the academic space. And sometimes what concerns me is that, you know, the research that you do for policymakers and all of that to enable them to make more informed decisions, those policies that are going to be implemented at the end of the day are going to affect a NOMSA, an ordinary person on the ground. What processes are being put in place to also communicate with the public? Because as somebody who's worked in the newsroom, we love them. We love research outputs. We love putting such stories together in terms of what people of your caliber have put together. Are there even efforts, you know, to simplify them for the media to understand and also, you know, in turn for them to be communicated to the public?
No, I think that's crucial. I mean, I've focused on the policy aspect, but of course it's much broader than that, as you've said. And it's not only in terms of policymakers, but also in terms of industry, civil society, as well as the public at large. And I think that comes to science communication. Yeah. In practice, it's challenging for researchers. You finish a paper, you're already overdue on the next paper. You've got a pile of things in your inbox. You've got students waiting for feedback and so on. the intention is often there. Sometimes you've written a paper and you know that it would lend itself maybe to an op-ed in an online newspaper or an online platform or whatever, and you intend to do it, but you're already moving on to other things and so on. So I mean, I reflect on that because I think that is the way to go. Right? It's not actually, I mean, depending on the nature of the research, some research is highly technical and it would be, very difficult for me as a non-specialist to understand what some of the colleagues in this room are doing. But for some of the research that has that broader relevance, I think it's about extracting pieces and so on, interacting with the media and so on, because there is that appetite there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prof. Fiona Tregenna. I believe that Prof. Nathaniel Boso is joining us online. Thank you so much for your patience. Prof, are you there with us? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here with you.
And we are so ready for your presentation. Please go ahead.
Sure. So before, can you allow me to share my screen?
Just hold on a bit, Prof. Can we all hear him? Like clearly? Okay, all right, okay. Prof, you can go ahead.
Okay, so I was asking if you can allow me to share my screen. Can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly.
Yes, so can somebody allow me to share my screen, please? Hello? Yeah, I was asking for my screen to be allowed to be shared.
My mic is off.
Mm. But whilst I wait for my screen to be enabled, I wanted to also share a thought on the question you asked, Fiona. It has to do with the communication of our research to the ordinary person on the street. I think one of the things that we can do, which I have been trying to do with my colleagues, is to try to write what we call policy briefs in everyday language, and then share that with variety of media houses where the technical languages are broken down into everyday English or everyday local languages for the ordinary person to be able to consume. So I think for academic research, we need to be going to that direction, such that our research can be more impactful and more relevant to the communities that we serve. So that's one of the thoughts I want to share in addition to what Prof. Fiona was sharing. Okay, so now I can get my screen now. Okay, so can you please see my screen now? Hello, can you confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you regarding how I think we could carve a community of research practice to support Africa Continental Free Trade area for social and economic impact. So pretty much what I'm going to share is Fiona has said a lot about it, but I will try to also share thoughts, additional thoughts that I think will help enhance our dialogue regarding how community of research practice can help support Africa's continental free trade area. So my discussion points will follow the outline here. So I'm going to try to focus to give you some insight on the African continental free trade area, which I will call AfCFTA. And then I will give you some insights on research and innovation deficiencies across the sub-Saharan Africa country, which has an implication for the extent to which the AfCFTA concepts and initiative can effectively be implemented. And then I will then introduce you to what I think community of research practice, CRP, can contribute in addressing those research deficiencies. And then I will introduce you to how I think CRP can be used to drive research and innovation base across AfCFTA's member countries. Then I will end with a proposed framework that I think the AfCFTA leadership could use to drive research, community of research practice across member countries. So as a background, and I think Fiona did a very good job in introducing the African Continental Free Trade Area concepts to you. And I think this is a laudable idea, a laudable initiative that tries to bring a continent that has largely been cut off from the rest of the global economy. And yet this is a continent that has the youngest population, which I call a demographic dividend that could be leveraged to make Africa relevant in the world of international business and trade. Here we are with a continent of about 1.3 billion population, which, as Fiona said, is equivalent to the population of China. But then at the same time, this is a continent with 55 countries with diverse languages and currencies and regimes. And so the AfCFTA's primary objective being to promote economic integration and facilitate trading among African countries. It's a laudable idea. And its long-term strategy of harnessing the continent's vast potential to become a global powerhouse, it's fantastic. But what we need to be mindful of are a variety of issues that, if not addressed, may mean that AfCFTA may become just one of those Africa Union initiatives that do not get anywhere. So we are trying to achieve economic integration of a continent with 55 countries, independent sovereign countries, with freedom to do whatever they choose to do. How could that goal be achieved in an environment where we have highly militarized borders, such that moving from Ghana to Togo, which should be seamless, would take you several hours? Looking at the transportation costs, again, traveling from Nairobi to Johannesburg will cost you more than $500 for 4-hour flights. And one wonders how stringent visa regimes across African countries with multiple currencies and multiple languages, unexpected government takeovers, and rising nationalism on even trade infrastructure and digital infrastructure. One wonders how these challenges that are pervasive across Africa will permit for an economic integration. And I think that these challenges facing AfCFTA could be addressed if a community of research practice is put in place to enable a pooling of resources and collaboration among researchers across the continent to address some of these grand challenges facing the continent. And so I think that these mechanisms that AfCFTA has put in place, they are laudable mechanism in eliminating trade barriers, boosting trade in goods and services, facilitating, all these are fantastic ideas. they need to be examined within the context of the existing endemic challenges that I've just listed. So yes, the mechanism holds great promise, but I believe that they need to be measured relative to the existing challenges that the continent is facing. So when we look at the research and innovation landscape across sub-Saharan Africa, it is clear that one critical aspect that has yet to be integrated to the AfCFTA framework is research and development, or you may call it research and innovation. Because research and innovation, research and development serves as a fundamental driver of sustainable development, and decision-making needs to be predicated on evidence, research, evidence that is well thought through and executed to the highest standard. And I know many people will argue that there are a bunch of research that has been published in Africa about Africa. But the key issue is, to what extent are those research executed to the highest standard? And to what extent are they dealing with emerging issues that are relevant to the African continent? And you will recognize that across Africa, we have a fundamental problem when it comes to research. Not only is the volume of research from Africa low, the quality also comes into question. And these issues are coming out of problems of lack of robust research culture. So you look across universities across Africa. I normally tend to excuse South Africa because I know that South Africa, many of South African universities tend to be very much well developed in terms of research culture and in terms of research investment. But for the rest of Africa, research culture is pretty much low. And I get even much more worried when it comes to the question of quality of research that comes out of Africa. I have the basis to believe that many universities across Africa are unable to hold researchers, faculty to the culture of research excellence. And some will argue that, yeah, it's probably because of the volume of work that academics have to do in many universities in Africa. But this lack of robust research culture is extremely undermining the capacity of the African society to drive sustainable growth. And of course, issues of deficiency in science and technology education, a heavy reliance on government or foreign donors for research funding, mean that quality research is difficult to come by in Africa. But then linking to the discussion we are having here today, the question of community of research practice, the extent to which there is a fiber of collaboration between researchers in academia, industry, and local business and government, that itself is highly limited. And my visit to many African universities, interaction with policymakers and industry people tells me that there is lack of trust between academics and industry and government when it comes to research and its consumption. And I think these challenges have culminated in the low investment in research in Africa. Now here we are with a report from Bloomberg showing the extent to which Africa is eliminated, is sidelined when it comes to the world's most innovative countries. None of the top 10, in fact, none of the top 20 has an African country included. And as I was arguing earlier, this has a lot to do with the extent to which research quality of research and its relation to development is taken seriously in Africa. And if we look at the top spending research and innovation countries in the world, again, you do not find any African country included. And if you look at these statistics here, if you look at research spending across the world, Africa is still the lowest. In other words, we do not take research seriously as a continent. We spend the least on research and innovation activities. And that actually translates, if you look at the percentage of our GDP that we commit to research and innovation activities, across Africa, it is less than 1%. So, and in some African countries, it's actually close to zero. So the implication of all this is that we need to really look at the way research is perceived and funded in a continent. Now, this brings me to the question of how community or research prizes can be used as a channel to address these research and innovation deficiencies that we have been observing across the continent. Now, when we are trying to introduce this concept of CRP as a mechanism to addressing research deficiency, we've got to be careful in not importing or borrowing blindly research and innovative funding models in other continents, because as we all recognize, Africa is a unique environment. Africa's socioeconomic condition is unique, and it's not just unique, it is complex, because this is a continent of 55 sovereign countries with multiplicity of languages and currencies and developmental goals. And if you were going to import models from other continents and plant them in Africa, I'm sorry, I don't think that is going to work. So what we need to do is an Africa context-specific community of research practice that, I believe, if functioned around collaborative network of researchers, academics, policymakers, and practitioners who are able to come together to generate, share, and apply knowledge that is specific to the developmental needs and problems of Africa, I think we may begin to get a long way in addressing this deficiency. So with this community of research practice, I think we are able to pull people from diverse backgrounds in terms of research focus, in terms of methodological and analytical skills. We should be able to bring all these guys together to tackle some of the major research questions that not any one person will be able to address. And that also means collaboration among universities across Africa. And one of the challenges that we face in Africa is that many universities do not collaborate among themselves. We tend to observe collaboration between African universities and European or North American universities. But in terms of collaboration between and among Africa universities, that has been low. And I think if you are able to embrace this notion of community of research practice and Africanize it and begin to see African universities as partners and collaborators in a journey to find solution to the major problems facing the continent, I think we will get a long way to address many of the problems we have. So I believe that such communities can therefore play a crucial role in enabling and supporting the research and innovation research and innovation base within and across AfCFTA's member countries. And I think this can be done in many ways. And so I've listed about 9 of these ways that community research practice can help drive and support AfCFTA's initiative. 1, we need to be promoting a culture of research excellence. The tendency that research in Africa is predicated around producing volumes of work to enable an academic to get promotion to the next level, I think it's a wrong notion of research culture. We should now begin to do, I think, what South Africa is already doing, which is finding a mechanism to promote research excellence that is based on quality of research output. So I noticed that many South African universities have adopted the several research frameworks, excellence frameworks like the ABS list, which is great to me. And if other African countries will also begin to embrace such a culture where people get recognized for the excellence of research outputs they produce, not just recognized, but rewarded financially, I think that will help in a long way to push quality of research across the continent. And if you're able to have a community of researchers who believe in the practice of research excellence, I think that will help in a long way to give the AfCFTA implementers a well-grounded evidence for informing the decisions they make. And of course, we can talk about research excellence culture, but the question is, do we have the capacity for research excellence across the continent? And again, we need to be sincere to acknowledge that we do not have the research capacity. That which means that when we are talking about research as a community of practitioners, we need to be thinking about how we can help each other to build our capacity. Of course, there are some research institutions in Africa who have good capacity, reasonable capacity. But I think if we are able to leverage the capacity of our universities, our research institutions, we should be able to push forward the frontier of research excellence on the continent. And for that matter, helping decision makers like those implementing the AfCFTA initiative to be able to undertake research that we can all have confidence in. Of course, resource mobilization, and if I'm talking about resource mobilization, I'm particularly referring to financial and talent mobilization to support research in Africa. And again, that's another challenge. As I just indicated to you, the percentage of our GDP committed to research and innovation is very low. Now, what should we do as researchers in a community of research practice? What should we do? We need to be able to mobilize resources among ourselves. We need to be able to work as a team of researchers, as a team of people who are committed to addressing developmental challenges on the continent. So that if it comes to applying for research grant within Africa and across the world, I believe we should be able to mobilize colleagues across the continent to be able to do that. And of course, many of the challenges facing Africa and AfCFTA, for that matter, is interdisciplinary in nature, meaning we need to be able to bring together researchers from diversity of disciplinary areas, from science, from natural science to business science to anthropology, wherever it says that will enable us to be able to address Africa's developmental challenges in an interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary manner. We need to be able to do that. And I think having a community of research practice can help facilitate that. And of course, knowledge transfer across institutions, policy advocacy, and trade facilitation activities of AfCFTA can be improved if you are to have a community of research practice. And of course, we're also talking about sustainability and inclusiveness of AfCFTA. Now, this is not something that we are going to be guessing. It's got to be predicated on sound scientific research, to the extent that if AfCFTA has a mission of making it possible for the youths and women to be fully involved in trading activities across the continent. We need to be thinking about how we can use community of research practice to bring scholars, researchers, practitioners, policymakers across the continent to find this solution to the increasingly segregated African society. My view here is that Africa is too much segregated. The number of people, vulnerable people, who are cut off from the trading and economic activities in Africa is too staggering. So we talk about Africa being a young population of people, but to what extent are those young people allowed to participate in trading and economic activities across the continent? We do not know. And I think a community of research practice with people from diverse backgrounds can begin to tackle some of these difficult to solve problems and be able to provide scientific evidence for decision makers to rely on when making decisions. So, these are some of the ways that I think community of research project can help facilitate and enable AfCFTA's initiative. Now, here is an example from the European Union. I'm not saying what is being done in the European Union Horizon project should be blindly imported to Africa, but there's a lesson to learn from the European Union. So the European Horizon project, which is EU's primary funding program for research and innovation, has allowed the European Union to leverage its annual budget of 95 billion euro to drive industrial competitiveness and growth of the European Union bloc. And that Horizon project encourages and supports financially, human resource-wise, infrastructure-wise, the opportunity for researchers to collaborate and facilitate dissemination of knowledge. Knowledge not only among academics, but knowledge that trickles down to policymakers and to ordinary consumers within the European Union and beyond. And the interesting thing is that of this 95 billion euro commitment, about 8 billion of this money is dedicated specifically to establishing various CRPs across the European Union. And this involves fostering and supporting partnerships between industries, academia, the public, and other stakeholders within the bloc to pursue what they refer to as multiple strategic developmental goals. And I think the same can happen in Africa. So the African Union, in coming out with these AfCFTA initiatives, as I said, is great, can also begin to think along the line of the European Union Horizon project to see how we could mobilize financial resources, human resources, and talent to pursue multiple developmental goals and challenges facing the continent. So in thinking about this question about how we could use community research practice to support the AfCFTA project and initiative, I came out with this suggestion, this framework of how we could leverage the communities and the AfCFTA's strategic vision and direction alongside community structure and resource base and operations to drive community success and societal impact. And kindly permit me to introduce you to this framework. It's a bit complex framework, but I'll try to explain to you what I'm trying to suggest here. So this framework is simply trying to align the strategic vision and direction of AfCFTA, and a community of research practice. So we know about the mission and the vision, objective, and the core values that inform the creation of the AfCFTA initiative. Now, with this knowledge base, I think that researchers from across the continent in multiple African institutions can now begin to come together to figure out a mission for specific group of communities of research practice that is functioning around the AfCFTA's mission. While with that mission and vision, I think we can now begin to figure out the kind of structure and resources that we need to be able to address and support the vision of the AfCFTA initiative. So here, in thinking about the community structure and resource base, I'm thinking of building and managing a network of actors, which may include AfCFTA member state institutions, governmental institutions, policymaking institutions, academic institutions, research and development institutions, freelance researchers, industry experts, policy think tanks, investors, and community representatives and international bodies. I think we need to be able to bring this group of people together to be able to interrogate the developmental challenges that the AfCFTA initiative is trying to address. And that also means investment in infrastructure and capacity. And here, we need to be thinking about the human resource capacity across the continent. As I said, we're thinking about research capacity. We are lacking in terms of talent. And I also think that when we are thinking about infrastructure, establishment of centers of excellence is an important issue. And this is why the ORTARChI Research Initiative is a fantastic idea. Being able to bring together researchers from across the continent to tackle specific developmental problems. I think this is something that we should encourage and continue to support. The 10 ORTARChI Research Chairs is simply not enough. We need more of these kind of initiatives function around centers of excellence. And I think the World Bank Centers of Excellence is also another example to cite, where the World Bank, I think, invested about hundreds of millions of dollars 5 years ago to establish several centers of excellence across the continent. And I think these are something we need to continue to do as a way of building collaborative platforms to capture, process, and share information and infrastructure across the continent. And beyond that, we also need to be thinking about research and innovation institutionalization. Here, I'm thinking about re-establishing a culture of research excellence across institutions, across research institutions across the continent. And that will also mean incentivizing and supporting researchers in terms of grant prizes, competitions, as a way of strengthening people's propensity to pursue excellence in research, as opposed to doing research simply because we want promotion. And with that structure, resource base, and mission in mind, we can now begin to put in place specific operational activities that will help us to achieve these goals. And here, I'm talking about intra-Africa, within Africa, across regional trade issues. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities and resource needs that need to be put in place to make sure that these initiatives become a reality? And I think we can do that through a variety of interventions and outcomes, that if these are to be operationalized, we should be able to have long-term outcome that works towards the achievement of the AfCFTA initiative. So this is a framework that I'm proposing that if AfCFTA were to adopt, may help in a long way to support this initiative. So in a nutshell, I would like to re-emphasize that community research practice is crucial to addressing the multifaceted, complex challenges that the African continent is facing, and that the AfCFTA concept is going to face. If African continent and the AfCFTA initiative is going to overcome the barriers of militarized borders, multiplicity of visa regimes and currencies and language issues and infrastructure challenges, we need a community of research practice that can provide a dynamic platform to help overcome these challenges. And so I believe that by fostering collaboration, knowledge sharing, capacity building, and advocating for supportive policies, such communities of research practice can help contribute to the development of a thriving research ecosystem on the continent to support the mission and the goals of the AfCFTA initiative. And hopefully, with such a practice being embraced across the continent, we may be able to realize the vision of the AfCFTA initiative. I guess I've talked too much, so thank you very much for the opportunity.
The mic, oh, it's on. Prof, thank you so much for quite an insightful presentation, and also to you as well, Professor Fiona. You know, every time there are presentations about Africa, we go on about how most of our population are young people. Mm-hmm. And obviously that also presents itself with a lot of opportunities for us. You have a strong manpower, young people also come up with fresh ideas and all of that. But you look at the ILO report, which shows that our young people, as compared to their European counterparts, there's a skills gap and we're falling behind. Every time the unemployment rate is released in South Africa, the job numbers, you see how depressing the numbers look in terms of young people. So we brag about the 70%, but we are losing all of that. And it's not only white young people, even Black young people are starting to move out of the country in the South African context, also in other parts of the continent. So in all this work that we do, also with, you know, I'm gonna start with you, Prof. Boso, because you, you know, are the research chair in entrepreneurship and youth unemployment. And when we talk about entrepreneurship, digital skills, those are the kind of skills that our economies need at the present moment. So in your role as chair, the role that you occupy, how are you solving that problem? Because yes, we brag about the 70%, but we're not utilizing our resources, this human resource, this powerful human resource to its utmost best. Firstly, in consulting it, because you go to the rural parts of our country, also other countries on the continent, I've done several travels, the innovation that is there with very little resources, and you ask yourself, if these young people were actually given the resources, were capacitated, were given information, access to information, you know, what would come of that? So in your role, how are you going about empowering these young people, more especially in the field of entrepreneurship, digital skills, and so forth?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. That is very, very insightful question. And when I get asked this question, I become really excited because it makes me feel that I'm contributing to solving some of the problems of the African continent. Yes, it's very depressing when we hear those statistics about young people in Africa. These are brilliant, energetic people who should, under normal circumstances, not be unemployed. But we also find ourselves in a society, in a cultural context, where young people are not allowed to participate in economic activities. So you go to typical African society, you are a young person below the age of 21. Yeah, you are not allowed to ask questions. You can't go to the bank to ask for money to do any business. They'll tell you don't have any experience. You don't have any collateral. You don't have. So you'll be told all the things that you do not have. Now, this is where my chair comes in, that, okay, can we now begin to figure out how we can leverage the intellectual, physical resources of these young people for them to be able to create their own jobs? Now, how could they do that? We cannot continue to talk about the traditional economic paradigm for creating wealth when we're talking about young people. Now, these young people are technologically oriented. They are happy dealing with digital tools. They are happy trying to play with digital solutions. And I think that if we are to focus on technology-based entrepreneurship in Africa, where we provide an enabling environment, capacity building for these young people, supporting them, mentoring them to be able to find ways of using digital platform tools and solutions, they should be able to create their own wealth. And there are several examples that I can give you here. There are several technology-based businesses that are being created by young people across the continent. You could be thinking about the Jumias and several of them, farm lines, and all these technology-based businesses being started by young people. And many of these young people leading these digital solution-based companies are creating fantastic jobs. And I can tell you what they are doing. Many of them are now able to serve underserved markets at the base of the pyramid. So in the past, when multinational enterprises will ignore the low end of the economic pyramid, these young people are now using digital solutions to bring these low end base of the pyramid to the mainstream economic activity. They are finding solutions to grand challenges. So we are thinking about students who are able to find technology solutions to increase the lifespan of tomatoes, the lifespan of banana and apple. To me, these guys are now changing our society. And many of them are also doing something else that is interesting, if you can permit me to talk about, is that...
Just a minute, Prof.
Yes, not only are they creating jobs for themselves, they are also solving great societal, social problems, particularly the question of how do we bring vulnerable people who have been excluded? How do we bring them to the mainstream economic activity? And I think these young people are using digital solutions to solve some of these big problems that have continued to elude our continent.
Absolutely. Yeah. You also spoke about, and this question will be directed to you, Prof. Tregenna. I'm interested in the Africa Free Trade Agreement on a micro level, because a lot of times we hear how it will impact big businesses and all of that. I'm not sure what the objectives or the aims of your research was, but did you at any point look at the impact and how it would benefit or how it could benefit people on the ground? And touching on young people as well. So an ordinary person on the ground, how will they leverage on that and all of that?
Thanks. I think if it doesn't touch the lives of ordinary people in Africa, it wouldn't be a success. It's obviously still at the very early stages of implementation. Some of the protocols are still being negotiated and so on. I think things are moving, as I said, quite a lot faster than if you look at in Europe, how long it took them to negotiate all of their things with the EU and so on. So it seems to be moving quickly. One of the phase 2 issues is actually youth and women and their inclusion in trade issues. I mean, I think that the opening of trade barriers within the continent will create opportunities. Even, for example, for small traders to be able to move goods across borders and so on. As I said, that's not just about the removal of trade barriers. That's just one step. It's about the non-tariff barriers. It's about the infrastructure. It's about not being stuck for days at a border post and being hassled there and so on. So I think the opportunities are there and they will unfold in the years which are coming. But it's not just about the traders; it's about the producers.
Yeah.
Right? So the idea is that, as I said, more of what's consumed on the continent should be produced on the continent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that links up with Prof. Boso's remarks, even about the dynamic potential of youth entrepreneurs, of digital technologies, of innovation. And that innovation doesn't have to be innovation which is in a lab, which is registering a patent and so on. It can be incremental innovations, adaptations and so on, that opens up production and trading opportunities across the continent.
Absolutely. So just to make you aware, guys, so that disturbing noise that we heard, the Zoom platform actually got hacked. So we've had to close it. So if there are any online questions, they'll come from Facebook. Sibahle, my phone is open if there are any questions as well. I'm also going to open questions to you guys on the floor if you'd like to ask any questions regarding research itself and some of the statistics that have been presented or research into the Africa Trade Agreement. So the floor is open as well if there are any questions that you'd like to pose to the two profs. Yes, sir. Let me is there a mic that can go to?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the two presenters did a great job in trying to reveal some of the dynamics. But for me, a big concern is we have a lot of startups. We have a lot of young guys coming out with innovative ways of doing things. My big challenge is governments are not creating the enabling environment for their products to be accepted. Now we have a lot of young guys in technology. We still import computers fixed. When you go to our ministries, when the computers get spoiled, we don't allow the young guys to do it. We send it back to the big companies. So my question is, for how long are we going to encourage these young guys to be having startups, being innovative, but there's no market for their products? And it's a big concern. So you see startups in Africa coming up and failing. When you look at the number that succeed vis-a-vis the numbers that fail, it's a huge gap. And I think we need, I don't know your views, but we need to find a solution to that because we need to create a market for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's correct.
Prof, would you like to take that one?
Yes. So yeah, you are absolutely right. There are millions of startups being started by young people across the continent. But the avenue for them to thrive is the problem. I have this concept in my mind, the notion of smallness of African businesses. Why are African businesses consistently small? Why are they not able? So outside South Africa, to be fair, why are they always so small? Why is it that 95 to 99% of those startups fail within the first 2 years? Regulatory environment is the main issue. And I think a solution, so we cannot continue to complain that the regulatory environment in Africa is not good. We've got to do something about it. And I think one thing that we can do is for researchers like us to get closer to policymakers, to work with the policymakers to advise them on how they can ease the cost of doing business, the stress of doing business in Africa. And if you do that, I think they will begin to listen to us, because how long shall we continue to say that it should not take more than 90 days or 6 months to start a business? How long will we continue to complain that revenue collection agencies are after young people to pay taxes when they have not made any significant revenue, right? And in a place like Ghana, why should government of Ghana to the Bank of Ghana be asking young technology companies to pay what they call integrity deposits? And you're talking about $50,000 and above. So these are some of the things that I think we need to have a discussion about. And as I said, we researchers, policy researchers, need to get closer to policymakers to advise them on the best practices around the world. And that will help. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Any other question? Yes, sir.
My comments, but which will kind of course attract reaction. One is to do with the population growth. I know we are talking about youth, and you've said that Africa has a big population of the youth, and who are largely not very productive. So it means they are largely burdened to many others who are productive. And I always wonder why in our discussions, we should also not talk about the issue of containing the growth rate. I'm an engineer, I'm not an economist, but I also know that my president, the president of Uganda, usually encourages population growth, but that's when we have a bigger market. But when you have got a population that's growing at a faster rate than the GDP and the other facets of industrialization and growth, then you are like a frog that jumps 5 meters and then goes back 6 meters. And at the end of the day, you have gone back 1 meter into the ditch. So I would want your view on that. The second one is to do with the, of course, you're talking about research and development within the African continent and African context, in the context of this African free trade area. But it's largely a political question as well. You've said that we have 55 countries, we have more than 2,000 languages. I think that's what I picked. We have these multiple visas. You talked about visas. Getting a visa to South Africa is a nightmare. You have to wait for 5 days and so on. I remember the late, and I'm sorry to say this, I remember the late Gaddafi, before he was hunted down and found in a ditch. He had mooted the idea of an African Union. And I think his intention was that we should have like United States of Africa, instead of having these fragmented countries. You might look at it as a union or as a confederation, whatever form it is. I think it was better than these loose countries that we have. So in your view, don't you think it's better to have, Africa united in that way, so to have all these issues addressed together? Thank you.
Can I?
Hold on, let's just give Prof. Tregenna, and then you can go after that.
Okay,
Okay, go on.
I'll be quick and then hand over to Prof. Boso. No, I mean, I think in terms of your comment around population, I think on the one hand, a growing population can be a resource. It can contribute to markets, to ideas, to the labor force, and so on. Of course, that needs to be balanced with sustainability, environmental and otherwise. And I think it varies as well by the region of Africa in terms of ecosystems, water scarcity, and so on. So I think there are myriad issues to consider there, as well as, of course, that of reproductive rights and reproductive freedoms of women. So I think for sure it's a complex issue with many facets. I don't think anyone would be advocating a population control per se, but it's about also growth to sustain growing populations. In terms of the comment around broader African integration, I think it's a political issue, which there'll be diverse perspectives on. I'm sure even in this room. I think it was something which I brought in at the outset of my presentation around how far to take the integration and at what pace. So free movement of goods, free movement of capital, free movement of people, single currency. There will be various dimensions to this. And probably it's an issue as well of sequencing and phasing. I think it's something which as researchers, we can certainly contribute to. But it's ultimately a broader societal question.
Prof. Boso, your input, please.
Yes, just a quick addition to what Fiona was saying. I think, yeah, of course, I agree. This is a complex developmental issues, the question of population growth. But then, if I were to learn from China, I'm not saying China is a heaven, but at least China has mobilized and leverage on its large population for market power in terms of consumption. So with China's over 1 billion population, businesses around the world troop to that market to create new wealth. And so I think that Africa's growing youth population should be leveraged to create economic power. So personally, I wouldn't advocate for any population control. We just need to put in place strategies to convert this demographic dividend into economic power. Yeah, and we are most likely to find talent in growing young people. So I think I will actually advocate for more population growth in Africa than control. because if you were to, if I were to link that to the second question, which is integrated Africa, imagine 1.3 billion people belong to one country of Africa. That becomes economic power.
Just as a follow-up, I mean, you are giving China as an example, but China of course had almost $1 billion by 1980s, 70s. Yes. They already had $1 billion, but they had put policies of the one child policy. It's only recently that they eased it a little bit, but you can see that in all those years they were really growing. So I mean, that's why there's a debate. There should be a debate as to whether we should just allow the population of Africa to continue growing just like that. Yes, it's good to have big numbers from the economic point of view and the powerhouse you're talking about, but also the quality of the people and to the levels that they are skilled matters a lot. Thank you.
Yes, I agree.
I think whether such policies would actually work and get the buy-in of the African population, more especially, you know, because for us, it's not only an economics thing, there's religion, African practices involved as well. So it becomes quite dynamic when it comes to the African context. But fair point. I'm going to allow for 2 more questions. You, sir, in the front, and then you at the back.
What I wanted to say is what you said, because this discussion of cutting down population and what have you, don't forget that the Bible says that's a Christianity part of it.
Be fruitful.
Go into the world and produce and expand.
Yes.
But I would like to finish because you have aroused my thinking. I once told a colleague in the USA and also in Germany, I told them, please look after these structures that you have in America and Europe, because we as Blacks, we are coming. I don't know whether you know what I mean. What I'm trying to say is that the Blacks are now the ones that are preaching the religion in the UK, for example. Okay, so we are taking back the Bible to the North. And eventually, we take over. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir. And then,
Yeah, thank you so much. Professor said things are moving very fast. My worry is how much have we tried to educate the 1.2 billion people about this whole issue? The people on the street, do they know anything about it? That's one. The other thing, I've talked about so many differences, but the economic differences are also very big among these African countries. So these also have to be taken into the account. The last thing is, we should avoid starting something that we can already have a paper about its failure. We can already say cultural, economic, social, religious made this thing fail already. Why don't we start with resolving the differences within the blocks under those concepts? Can we resolve issues within the SADC, the East African community, the ECOWAS? Because I come from Tanzania, so we still have issues within the East African community. Common currency, we ended up with the political federation, that's all. Other things are business as usual, what used to be so many years ago. So can we start with small blocks where there is somehow uniformity on culture, currency, talk about, and then see if we succeed, move on across the continent. Thank you.
so what I'm going to do, we left with 5 minutes. So I'm going to allow each of you to have 2.5 minutes just to touch on, some of the questions that were posed, but just your overall closing remarks as well. And then Prof. Boso also get it. So good luck utilizing the 2.5 minutes. Okay, Prof, you can go ahead, you can start.
Okay, so yes, thank you once again for the opportunity. And I just want to re-emphasize the fact that Africa holds lots of promise for the future. And I think integration of activities of Africa in terms of trading, in terms of economic activities, is something that is not negotiable. We need to be able to work together as a continent to leverage the demographic dividend that we have as a growing young population. Look, if you have a young population, you have a gold nugget that you cannot allow to go waste. Europe is a growing population. Europe is now issuing visa for people to go there to live there. Europe is now looking for younger people to go there. Why can't we leverage our young people for economic prosperity? And I think that all these many divisions we have across the continent in terms of militarized borders, and why should we need a visa for somebody from South Africa coming to Ghana? I don't get it. So we need to come together as a continent. And I think the AfCFTA concept is a fantastic concept. And we need a community of research practice to support this great concept and initiative for economic transformation of the continent. So that's my closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Prof. Tregenna?
Yeah, a quick response to the last question and then a quick overall comment. In terms of the last question about shouldn't we kind of sequence it, sort out issues within the regional blocks first? I don't think it necessarily has to be a linear process like that, because the AfCFTA is also not replacing regional blocks. It's not that COMESA, SADC, ECOWAS and so on would fall away. Those blocks still have a role. It's not that everything has to be resolved and people have to be using the same currency in there and so on before we could move to the next stage. Because in fact, even the lack of synchronization between the blocks is also a stumbling block. So I think in parallel, the blocks can be strengthened together with a broader regional integration. Lastly, I would just kind of circle back, I guess, to the theme of the session around science for society and the role of research. Many of these topical issues are things which, as individuals, we could have many opinions about, and we can exchange those. Let's also look at what we can contribute as researchers. And when I was looking at the range of even the existing ORTARChI chairs, it's incredible to see the diversity by discipline, by continent, and so on, and some not by continent, by discipline, by country and so on. And even where they look like really varying topics, but there will be links there. And not only amongst the ORTARChI chairs, but between ORTARChI chairs and SARChI chairs, or between ORTARChI chairs and other research institutes across the countries and so on. So let's look at the relevance of our research, how it can feed into these debates, and coming back to what you were engaging on earlier, not only with policymakers, but also with the corporate sector, with civil society, with labor, with the media, with ordinary citizens and so on, because I think there's a lot to offer even just within this room, let alone more broadly.
Thank you so much. So thank you to everyone who's here, who attended, everyone who's joined us online, obviously our panelists, Professor Boso and Professor Tregenna. Thank you so much for what you shared with us. A lot makes sense for me as well as an individual, but just your time and your insight into matters of that we discussed here today. We really appreciate that. So, and obviously to everyone who's made this possible, the NRF, the Tambo Africa Research Chair, research as well, and just everybody who's been a role player in making, creating such platforms where knowledge can be shared, where we can, discuss different matters. So these platforms are really important for us to be able to exchange knowledge and ideas as well. So thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you, much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, colleagues. We are going to start the cocktail, I believe, now. So we're just going to go outside. It's cocktail time, and use this opportunity as well to network further. Thanks a lot.